And now is the time to move on to our next discussion on optimizing consumer engagement and hyper-personalization for mobile marketing. Ladies and gentlemen, with the help of emerging technologies, organizations have been able to identify exact customer, or I must say consumer needs and requirements with the help of behavioral data and interpret individual characteristics. Now, this has created a paradigm shift from the previous product-centric marketing to a more personalized customer-focused marketing. Let us now hear from our experts of the industry on optimizing consumer engagement and hyper-personalization. We have with us Mr. Ankit, Director, Sales Digital Native, India, InMobi. Mr. Amit Verma, Head of Marketing and Growth, Rapido. We have with us Mr. Ankit Apurv, Head of Digital Marketing, Gaana. Ms. Priya Patankar, Head of Corporate Communication, PhonePe. Ms. Vanda Ferrao, Head of Marketing, FreshToHome. And to conduct this session, or I must say, to chair this session, we have with us Ms. Suchi Jain, Deputy General Manager, Head of Implementation, Madison, with us. I request you to kindly proceed with the discussion, Suchi.
Very good afternoon to everybody. Today we are here on behalf of AdGully team to speak about optimizing customer engagement and hyper-personalization for mobile marketing. So hyper-personalization is a buzzword that we've been listing across in our country when it comes to brands and advertisers. Today's panel is essentially to discuss that what is hyper-personalization, what are the benefits, what does it mean, what are the pitfalls, what are the segments where it works, where it does not work. And we as a panel are going to touch upon this, and to lead on to that, we first need to understand what is hyper-personalization. And for that, I would request Amit to please address this in terms of defining personalization for our viewers.
Thanks, Suchi. Thanks for having me here. Hello, everyone. Hello, my fellow panelists. I think right now we are talking about hyper-personalization, right? I think prior to talking about hyper-personalization, I think I should take a step back or talking about optimizing consumers' engagement. In today's world, I feel the only way to get a growth and success is through a user retention. Otherwise, it will become like a leaky funnel where always you acquire user and then they drop off from your base, right? When it comes to retention, I believe personalization is a holy grail to success. As the name suggests, whenever we are talking about hyper-personalization, it's the next level of personalization, to be very honest. When brands moves ahead from a name, location, or other demographics or online customer availability parameters. Whenever we are talking about hyper-personalization in marketing, it's actually a shift from one size fits all strategy to a very consumer-driven, personal comms and targeting strategy, where you always try to provide relevant products, services, or communication to a user so that you can get a better ROI at each and every step of a funnel. This hyper-personalization method gives a brand a better opportunity to engage with the user and a more meaningful way and improve overall customer experience over a period of time, right? Whenever we are saying hyper-personalization, then we always try to talk to AI or ML or big data, because we have to understand that whenever we are talking about personalization or hyper-personalization, you need a lot of data. Till the time you won't understand the user, that what he is doing, at what time he is doing which kind of activity, what is his day in a life, you can't target him. You can't talk to a user in a best possible way. Whenever we are talking about any kind of a retargeting or any kind of a user engagement. So there are different kind of a product, comms, and content engagement which a brand can create. And by which, whenever a user feel that brand is talking to him in a better manner, in a more personalized manner, the affinity towards a brand goes up drastically, right? There are like a different kind of OTAs and OTT platforms who has done really great work when it comes to hyper-personalization. Whenever you go on your app, you will see a content which actually you like. It's not a content which they are throwing everywhere to every place, right? They always try to customize a content or maybe a web page based upon your likability. Even if you talk about in Rapido, we have a lot of geo data, right? Where we know that my user is going from which place to which place, right? Point A to point B, at what time he used to take different kind of a rides. On a basis of that, we also tag him that whether he is at home, whether he is at shopping mall, whether he is at commercial place, or he is at office, right? And on a basis of that, we always try to customize his comms so that he will feel better and he will correlate to a content in a much and better way, to be very honest. I think if you have to understand personalization, certainly you can just see all the apps around you who are doing a really great job. It could be Amazon, Flipkart, or some other e-commerce app, or maybe OT and OTT players, right, who has done a really great job when it comes to hyper-personalization.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just add on what Amit was saying, right? So Amit given a very good view around the bottom funnel trend, right? But in fact, the hyper personalization also makes in the top funnel, right? In fact, every funnel of the marketing journey, right? Everybody doesn't like ads, right? But they like specific ads, right? So if you, the recent e-marketer report, right? So 90% of users generally love ads, right? If you show them the right product in the right language, in the right price range, and those kind of things, right? So it's very important to have in the first funnel itself, right? And high personalization things, right? So it's very important to figure it out, the hey, what the user is looking at, what language, and those kind of points, right? And try to show the relative content at the first stage itself, right? So yes, I think it doesn't matter what funnel you are, right? It's very important to show an hyper personalized content, right, to the user, and especially in today's time where the consumer is now the decision maker, right? With the post iOS 14, the IDFA restriction, now the cookieless world, now Google's talking about the new trend they're going to get on the GFIDs and all those trends. And it's very important to create that data value exchange, right? It's very important we as an an ecosystem partner to educate user also, right? So why collecting the data, why these things are important, right? So just to add on that, right? So it's most relevant in any part of the funnel curve.
So that was great, Amit and Ankit. Talking, like you guys spoke about pointers around AI, ML, and how at Rapido how things are done, what is it, and how advertisers across the industries are using this. Another point would be if we could, just get into that how, because it's data, right? Data is the most important element by which the AI and ML is going to use all of this information and then cull it out, and then how advertising is best served to the consumers that we want them to buy our products or get engaged with our products. So can we just have a discussion around that? What would be the role of big data in terms of hyper personalization engagement? We understand that data is the crux, is the starting point, but then what role does it play? How does it get collected? If we could just have upon that, Vanda, if you could just add on to the pointers out there in terms of what would be that role of big data that will help us get into better hyper personalization, like we say.
Sure. Thanks, Suchi. Thanks for having me on this panel. I'll build on 2 points which Amit said about there is no one size fits all. And also at Rapido, you are privy to a lot of data because you know the consumer, right? You have all the first party data. So I think 2 things which will hold you in good stead, right, of using data is if you have first party data that powers you with a lot of insights. And the second thing is if you are a brand or a platform facing consumers, so you are ably suited to also reach out. So with us at FreshToHome, we're the world's largest backward integrated meat and seafood player. And why this makes sense is we sit on a huge base of people, and we also have nearly 3,000 SKUs. And because preferences are very, very divided, right? I mean to say it's meat and seafood. So the way a Malayali, a Bengali, a Punjabi consumes it at times of the day in different kinds of preparations, right? That entire matrix, which is crisscrossed, is humongous. So we need some method to this madness to be able to navigate and get that growth. So I think we have the data, but how we go about it is very, very important. So the world is moving, I would say, from personalization to hyper personalization. All of us do personalization at some level. We have the typical bucketing, cohorting things which we use in CRM, etc., where we understand the consumer basis, affinity, what do they do, how do they react, etc. But I think to get better conversions, as Amit said, right, we are moving to this world of hyper personalization where you don't view them as a group, but you view them as, you view the individual, you see the likes, dislikes, etc. So this will only be powered when you have access to big data. And also when you use machine learning and artificial intelligence to make this into, bite-sized actionable points actually. So we have really, really great examples, which is Netflix. What better example, you switch on Netflix and you just pick up from where you left, right? You have your entire preferences out there. Wouldn't you just like someone to help you with that in your business? Obviously, we want. So all of us are moving towards that kind of path. How we do it is actually going to take time because there is humongous technology involved, automation involved. You need the know-how to be able to enable us to that part. But I think that is the way, that is the future. All of us are really going to go there. But, in this entire, quest of big data helping you, you also have to understand there is a consumer you're talking to. We are D2C brands, right? You have to make that experience as seamless, as on brand, and as natural and non-intrusive as possible. Because while you may have the data, but whatever you put out there, if it is grating, right, or if it is inconsequential, you will obviously not see the benefits of it. And I'll give you an example. A consumer, right? But how well do you know the consumer? If I am a Bengali living in Bangalore and I really like doi mach and I'm missing it, and my mom's visiting me for a week and she's a great cook. So imagine you have all these data points. So how do you reach out to the consumer? Like in FreshToHome, right? You open the app, all this is fed into it. And how do you make it actionable insights? So Vanda opens the home page and then she actually sees there is great katla at a great discount and there is a recipe. And you also get an emailer, you get a contextual SMS. So all these things add up to you getting the conversion, as Amit has actually said. So all these coming together in conjunction really, really build onto, utilizing big data to really have hyper-personalized engagement.
Right, that helps, Vanda. And I believe that data, like we said, and you explained it really well in terms of examples, that how the app, when you open at a FreshToHome or a Netflix, for that matter, Netflix has a very famous case study for Stranger Things, that when people were logging based on their other content that they consume on Netflix, when people were going back to Netflix on their home screens, they had different layouts for Stranger Things, wherein the characters were different. For I could have a different view for Stranger Things, you would have a different view. So yeah, that's how that's data and ML at its best, like to explain, Vanda. And I think moving on to that, then there is, because we have so much of data, we've understood what is hyper-personalization, we've understood that how data is important and how the whole hyper-personalization is fed and is built and is brewed and is prospering because of data. Priya, it will be great if you could just help us throw some light, on the benefits of hyper-personalization. Because in mobile marketing, which is 90% of India, for that matter, is browsing, is using mobile phones to do all of the activities. And we are now that country, where mobile phones are more accessible. So when it comes to the world of apps, when it comes to all the apps that are available to our consumers for the various needs that they need to do on a day-to-day basis, what do you think, what would be the benefits of the hyper-personalization that, or advertisers can use at its best?
Sure, Suchi. I think first of all, Vanda, some mouth-watering examples, especially around lunchtime. So definitely making me go to FreshToHome. So I think I'll sort of divide my response in two parts. One, I'd like to talk about what are really the benefits of hyper-personalization, and then maybe tailor it to what we've done. How have we, PhonePe as an app, what have we done and how have we benefited from it? I think my favorite sentence generally is that we need to move beyond spray and pray as marketers. I think I use that a couple of times a week in my job. And I think that is where really hyper-personalization does come in. And of course, while it's a journey, Ankit spoke about tailoring content for every user. That's something which definitely is an imperative for hyper-personalization. The second thing I'd say is also refreshing your communication based on the age and stage in a consumer's life. For instance, when you start using an app, sometimes you're a college student, you move on, your life progresses, and then you're earning, then you have a family. But if the app continues to talk to me like I'm a college student, it's in some way lost the battle of retaining me, right? So essentially that means understanding where your customer is in his life journey and sort of in her life journey, and tailoring that communication, and also being the app sort of updating the way it's talking to its customers based on what is a user's liking and actions. So I think largely these are the three things which I would say are key to thinking of hyper personalization. And then it moves in terms of benefits. I think couple of things I'd say are a no-brainer. One, of course, is it makes your customer's journey much easier. Most apps are hard to navigate. We work here, we don't realize it. But if you're looking for a particular offering, right, getting to it quickly is something what each user wants. Hyper-personalization can actually help you with that. One caveat I have is, as mobile marketers, we need to stop thinking that every time you need to unblock a customer, it needs to be an email or an interrupt. Your app itself should actually finally start personalizing. I mean, it should show you what you want. That is, frankly, the end state, the best end state for a consumer. Then, of course, I think, as I said, reflecting a customer's journey, that's extremely important in hyper personalization. As your customers evolve, your communication and should also start evolving. The last thing, of course, is thinking about the channels and timings. I think traditional marketers blast out messaging thinking send everything to everybody. I think that's completely contrary to how hyper-personalization would work. You need to understand what channels work for your users, for what kind of products, at what times. So those would largely be the three things. In PhonePe's case, of course, wide portfolio of offerings begins with the ability to send money, moves on to buying insurance and mutual funds and investing. One use case, I think, where we've actually been able to do the hyper-personalization part effectively is what we call as bill payments. Because every individual pays a bill at a certain time, has a preferred mode of payment, and likes to be reminded around that time. I'm unfortunately a last day bill payer. So actually the reminder is a lifesaver that way. So it's extremely personalized to how you pay your bill and which electricity board you pay your bill to. Very similarly, we do this with recharges also, because even recharges is a very staggered preference, how people sort of recharge their mobiles and how many mobiles they recharge. I do multiple, for instance. But again, it's a journey and we are getting there. We're tailoring use cases where it makes most sense for a user and where we have the best data to enable this.
I think I would like to add a few things to what Priya said. I think beautifully she said how personalization can be used, right, or hyper-personalization can be used in different industry. I think there is like a different dimensions where people are, or rather brands are using hyper-personalization. When it comes to benefit for like a growth marketer, I think mostly they benchmark it on a basis of ROI, that how they can showcase a right message at a right time to a user so that he won't get lost in clutter of a message, and then he will take an appropriate action and do a conversion, right? Apart from that, as Priya rightly said, there are different brands who are actually changing their wireframe. Once you land on a homepage, then you will feel that homepage is customized on a basis of your preference. It's not that we are selling anything to anyone, right? It's like we are selling those things to a user who actually wants us, and he's like a dire need of it, right? Which also reduces the journey of a user. So though there is a metric called time spent on a website, and there was like a time when people used to say that if the time spent on a website or in your app is higher, then the user retention is higher. But slowly people started realizing that if the time spent is really high, then actually user is getting confused. So you should shorten their journey of a conversion, and their hyper personalization comes into a picture at a big level. Ultimately, what is happening in a hyper personalization? You are creating, or you're collecting a lot of data points, right? What he is doing, when he is doing, which kind of preferences he has. You're putting into one warehouse, data warehouse, And then on a basis of that, you are retargeting a user or you are giving a recommendation to a user so that he can take a right decision and he won't get lost in a clutter of messages or clutter of products, right? I think Vanda was talking about that they have 3,000 SKUs, which is a pretty big number. If you talk about e-commerce, they might be having 10,000 or 1 lakh SKUs, right? You just think if you go on any e-commerce and then they will just pop up with different kind of messages, different kind of products, whether it's relevant or irrelevant, then you will get lost. Instead of that, once you go on some e-commerce site, and if they can showcase, okay, you have a interest in perfume, so they will showcase the perfumes to you. And maybe there is a male who has an interest in basketball, who showcase a basketball to you. Then you will feel so good that they will like a cut the chase in your life, and then they will directly take you to the add to cart or maybe make a payment page, right? Which can reduce the number of steps for making a payment, and it will feel really good to a user because he has not spent hours or half an hour to do a search, right? So I think there comes a hyper personalization where they increase the ROI, they reduce the search time or browsing time on an app, and still user is feeling very comfortable and they are feeling really good about it because now you are giving him what he wants.
Yeah, I think I'll build on from Amit. I mean, say really poignant and wonderful points. I mean to say, when a user comes on your app, you have to reduce as much friction, give him actually what you want. So when you see hyper personalization in mobile marketing, it's very relevant to, search and recommendation to reduce friction and to actually get conversion. And you see the brands like we are an e-commerce in effect. We have a plethora of offerings, 3,000, 4,000 SKUs. So you really don't want a consumer to get befuddled, but how do you have customized offerings? So search and recommendation really, really helps. Search because, for example, you have searfish, right? You have searfish, big, large, small, medium, so many. Then you have a steak, you have curry cut, you have so many things. So you really want to help him in this purchase journey. So he finishes this entire process effortlessly. So how, when he's searching for it, you give him what you want. Recommendation, right? I mean to say, there is something called static personas, which all of us are very happy doing it because basis affinity, we say, okay, this is your age, gender, demographics, we club them. But if you do static, you're really going to have a problem. It has to be dynamic. You have to know your consumer. For example, if I have reached the cart and I need to make a purchase of X amount to get free delivery, but I'm falling short, right? You know this consumer, you can proactively push a lower ticket size thing like eggs, etc., for him to actually complete the journey and get that conversion rather for him to go back and search and to have drop-offs. In terms of a dynamic persona, you keep on learning consumers again and again. So for example, there is this youngster, early jobber, he's buying chicken curry cut right now, but his behavior. So why don't you also upsell a marinade to him or chicken wings to him, right? So in that way, you understand the consumer, you upsell also, and you get a conversion. So I think search, recommendation, all this works very, very strongly. And if you know the consumer, you can really, really make the journey also very, very short and seamless.
So Priya, Amit, and Vanda, those were some great points that came out in terms of the benefits. And Priya, like you were mentioning, even I am part of that long list of consumers who would reach out, or the short list, I don't know, you would know it better, who reach out at the last minute. And when that app sends me that reminder, I realize, oh yes, rather than paying the penalty, it's better I do my payment right away with just a swipe. So that's how it helps. And also, like Amit rightly mentioned that, earlier the measurement used to be that how longer times are being spent on your website or your app. But then again, we have to cut the journey short because we realize that the consumers coming on the website or the app getting confused may not do it. And again, like Vanda said, with so many SKUs, how the whole personalization comes into play is very important. And one thing that I've realized amongst the three of this inputs was that it also helps us to do a cross-selling and upselling, right? I'm sure that at your end, you would be having that whole structure that, oh yes, like Vanda was giving an example that, if he's bought those chicken cuts and you could land up giving him chicken wings for the next recipe that he has to prepare or she has to prepare. And at your end, Priya, if you know that for a fact that they would be paying a bill, then you could go ahead and offer them a recharge of that sort, etc. So I think that also helps in personalization in terms of cross-selling and upselling. And there's one more report that I would like to share that I was going through where, Deloitte mentioned that 80% of when they did a survey that 80% of the consumers said that the likelihood to purchase would be higher when the messaging to them is personalized, right? Because they know for a fact that they want to buy a red t-shirt, which is of this particular size, and they want to get it delivered at free of cost by this particular day. So imagine when someone sends you that message right when you're browsing on for news, for sports, etc., and then you'll end up getting such messages. Then that's just a click away, right? You don't even have to have that thing of get the consumer to the website or the app, spending so much energy and time in making sure that person is interested and then does a purchase. So yeah, those were great points that come out when it comes to the benefits. And these were holistically, we can say that, hyper personalization helps not only getting better ROI for our organizations, for bettering the consumer experience, for cross-selling and upselling. But I think there is also an angle wherein, there will be a lot of segments where hyper personalization may not work. There would be a lot of industries where it may not apply. There will be a lot of places where you cannot go ahead with an hyper personalization because just that industry or that particular segment may not work. So Ankit, would you want to walk us through that entire aspect? While we know what is hyper personalization, the benefits, but like a coin has two sides, we also have to understand the other aspect as well, that where is it that this hyper personalization may not work for us?
Perfect, Suchi. Thank you for summarizing what Amit / Priya / Vanda had mentioned, right? So clearly, right, so that set the foundation, right? So because I'm here to create some 3 bubble burst movements, right, about hyper personalization, right? The first bubble burst movement, hyper personalization is not only about the first party data, right? Because if you rely only on first party data, beyond a point, you will start hitting a wall, right? So let's take a scenario, right? I'm a user who just opened FreshToHome app, right? And just browsed the product and dropped out, right? And for the FreshToHome, the first party data signal will say that, hey, I'm a user, might be looking for some eggs, right? And might have got dropped out, right? So he might be maybe from Bangalore, maybe some data signals and those kind of stuff, right? But what FreshToHome doesn't know that, hey, I'm a high scale apartment user who has paid Netflix subscription user and who purchased very heavy on big basket, right? Almost like 50,000 rupees per month, right? And who also loves going to different restaurants, do party at home and those kind of points, right? Now just imagine, right, if FreshToHome knows about all this data point, right? Their communication, whether it's an on-site communication, notification, or any kind of outreach to me would have been very, very different, right? So the magic is when you add the first party data with the second party and third party data, right? Is where beyond what the user is doing, right? So it's beyond your app ecosystem, right? So you get to know that, hey, this set of user is frequent traveler, the set of user who watches a lot of OTT content, the set of users who maybe shops a lot of fashion on Myntra, lot of things it does and maybe on the offline shopping, right? So clearly, this is the new wave that we are seeing, right? The first party data is not the only source for a perfect hyper personalization, right? It has to get married with the second party and third party, especially it becomes much more critical, as I've said in this past, right? Where the consumers are getting more and more controlled, right? And to choose what kind of data has to be shared, right? That the reason becomes more like a data value sharing, right? The second burst, the bubble burst movement, right, is the hyper personalization can only happen when you are in a digital native environment, right? When you have either, when I say digital native environment, that means whether you have any maybe a property which is either a website or an app, right? No, right? So that's the second bubble burst. Even the offline players can do it, right? And again, the party is again the magic is the first parties combining the first party data with second and third, right? This is something that we did with GCPL, and this is something for their homegrown brands, especially on the home sector for their bygone, for the good night products and all those things, where what we did was we tried to get their offline data and the hash format converted into matched with the second party data and started observing what these users are doing, right? And tried to have a separate communication for every user, right? Depending on what, right? So second, the bubble burst moment is you really don't need to have device IDs or cookie IDs only, right? Any kind of identifier can help you in creating an hyper personalization, right? You can create a data segment you need and party which can marry the data and have some meaningful number to that, right? A third bubble burst movement is hyper personalization can become creepy, right? And we all know, right? Hey, just imagine that I'm a user, and maybe me and my wife, we just have not announced that we are pregnant, and suddenly we get an ads all over the places that, hey, that these are the next products, right? That becomes like hell a lot of creepy, right? So, and at the same time, I'm just browsing on some content on some this part, and suddenly I get to say, hey, Ankit Grover, this is what your new offer is. It becomes really creepy, right? And that's the third myth buster, right? In the segments where this part, right? Hyper personalization is not only about getting personal, right? The most important thing is to get relevant, right? And the relevancy can only come, right, not only by the first party data, again going back to the same point part, right? It also comes by looking at the data points outside your app environment, right? And that's where you get to know more about the user, and that's where you can refine your communication to that particular user, right? And yeah, these are the few points where if you don't do it, especially the new user journey, right, where you have very little data about the user, right, it becomes this part. You need to really marry the data with the second party and the third party data, right, and use for the effective marketing campaigns, right? So yeah, happy to hear views from your space.
I think building on Ankit's point, I think those bubble bursts are very important. And before that, building on Vanda's point, as the number of items for you increases, the need for hyper personalization actually goes up. So, like Vanda was mentioning that she has 3,000 SKUs to sell. For my case, in Ghana, we have 35 million different songs that we need to serve out to 100 million plus users. And the song listenership of India is as diverse as the country itself, especially for Ghana, which is more popular within the Indic and the Vernac communities. So for me, hyper personalization ka jo pitfalls is something that I see on a daily basis. And one thing that Ankit put out very succinctly well is that hyper personalization is not the goal, is not the end goal. Hyper personalization is a tool. Your end goal is to create relevancy. That is something that has to be remembered. And this is where I feel that, and this is where I see on a daily basis where hyper personalization starts failing, or what are the pitfalls of hyper personalization where it comes in. Uh, if I have to categorize the pitfalls, I'll say that all the pitfalls can be categorized into two broad categories. One is more related to the social and the policy and the moral issues, which Ankit was highlighting in the third point. And the second is more on the technical aspects of it. When you are trying to create hyper personalization, but you fail, but you just miss the mark on relevancy, and sometimes you go very offshoot. So, if we talk about this the wrong method of doing personalization and missing the relevancy part, that is further divided into three parts. First is when you simply don't have the right amount of data. For example, if you have to visualize this scenario, just imagine any food ordering app, right? And now there are three different users. One user who has ordered one burger, only one burger on the app. The other who has made 10 orders. The third who has made 100 orders. Now the user who has made 100 orders, yes, you have a lot of data. You have an algorithm. You can start doing hyper personalization. But should you be creating hyper personalization for the first user who has just made first order, especially when you don't have third party data? That is where you start seeing the problem that you have on Ghana. You have listened to one Rajesh Khanna song and you start getting the same notification again and again. So you need to start setting boundaries and limits where you should hyper personalize and where you might wait. Ki yaar, abhi is not the right time, or maybe I don't have all the required data points internally. The second point is usually because we as marketers tend to miss out on the right campaign structures. A very interesting example recently happened with me on Amazon, where I was looking for olives for putting in my martini, and the next day I get a notification ki ye aam ka achar le, because both of these things are into pickled items and fall into the same category. So that is also sort of missing out on the context and sort of missing out on the right campaign structure. And the third part is the absolute lack of context that sometimes even the machine is not able to understand. And a very funny example that happens with us is that a user who listens to party hit songs on a Friday night, Saturday morning ko I should not be sending him कि अभी तो party शुरू हुई है. Saturday has to be a hangover song, and that my hyper personalization engine has to understand. So what context has to be understood when you are trying to hyper personalize. So these are the three things that I think any marketer should be taking care of while on the technical aspects of hyper personalization. And then the second part, the first part that I was coming at is more on the social and the policy based issue. The idea, there are two things. First is you don't spook the customers, like very rightly Ankit said. And the second is where I have seen hyper personalization work really well is that when you are actually increasing the value, you are doing some sort of value addition in the user's journey. For example, consider Cred for that example. Cred has the most personal financial information compared to most of the other apps, set apart a few banking apps here and there. Now, if it sends me, okay, hey, this is we have found that there is this miscellaneous charge added to your bill. Would you like to take this? Now, I know as a user that it has gone through my financial records, my credit card history, which I believe is more personal to me than my WhatsApp history. It becomes very spooky, but because it is giving me a huge value addition, I might be like saying yes, but usko karne ka sahi tarika is to set the right context in front of the user. You say to the user, hey, do you want us to generate this particular value for you? And for this, we'll be needing this. Take the right permission, take the right consent, and do this. The second part is on the policy part is there are certain aspects that we should not be going for hyper personalization. And that especially comes into the healthcare and health tech sector. And especially, and sometimes in Gaana as well, there's a very funny example I'll take. Healthcare, you can, if you are a pharmacy app, you cannot go and say, hey, because we know that you have diabetes, you should be taking this as well. That could be creating a value addition, but that is not something that the user might be willing to accept, or might want to receive a sort of a notification or email from the app. On Gaana, we have very funny, very interesting examples. Somebody is listening to heartbreak songs, and you would have no idea how many Indians are listening to heartbreak songs on a daily basis. But
Ankit, can you please quantify how many hearts are broken on a daily basis in this country?
I'll say that there are 3 times more heartbreak songs listeners than.
And I'm sure you can break it down. You can break it down into male, female, age group, geo as well. I'm sure you can break down on that because of hyper personalization.
Yes, we can, but so yeah, the coming back to that point कि ठीक है, दिल टूट गया तो टूट गया, लेकिन अब उसको मुझे पुश नहीं करते रहना कि यार आपका दिल टूट गया तो बस आप ये इमरान हाशमी के गाने सुनते रहो, ठीक है, या अल्ताफ राजा के गाने सुनते रहो, या उसको मैं ये भी नहीं बोल सकता कि चीयर अप होने के लिए आप ये वाले बादशाह के गाने सुनो या हनी सिंह के गाने सुन लो because you are feeling very like ठीक है in a certain kind of mood. So yes, negative emotions is something that when you are starting on a hyper personalization journey, maybe leave that part for the last when you have the right context and the right brand image setup. Start with adding positive and good news and those kind of things. So this is where I think the hyper personalization we see on a daily basis going down, but otherwise I think that's the future, and with all the caveats taken into place.
I guess we've had
points.
Yes, Vanda.
I mean to say the point you made on context was so important in terms of you said Cred actually knows our history, right? And the context of how you communicate to the consumer is very important. I think while Cred's example was positive, I mean to say healthcare and finance are 2 segments which are always handled with utter caution, right? There are so many times when we get calls for home loans, right? Different banks, they call us and they say, oh, you want a home loan worth this much. And they also tell us you have taken another loan, or, and that kind of information is actually detrimental. So, while in one purview, you think that having so much of information about the consumer will help you make that sale better. But the context also is so important, because, there is a saying, be overt with the collection of customers' data, but be covert about communicating what you know about them. So how do you manage it, right? It's not just about AI and ML, but it's also that understanding of how do you give that information to a person is very important. It can backfire. Also in terms of health, right? As Ankit Grover had mentioned, that there was this case about a pregnancy test. So in terms of hyper-personalization, we should also understand channels and also assets which are shared. For example, my email ID, I may also, share with my husband, or the house I'm staying, I share with my parents, right? So certain information which is shared, which is detrimental to it, has a negative impact. There was this case about a girl in the US living with her parents. She was browsing about, pregnancy, and the e-commerce player sent her a pregnancy kit, and she had not told her parents also. So this is the best example of hyper-personalization, but it backfired, and how. So therefore, the context is very important. So yeah, thanks, Ankit. I mean, so that's a revelation to me too.
I think both the Ankits have come out giving us, this entire two parts, which we were trying to address, the segments where hyper-personalization works and does not work, and the pitfalls, like Ankit, Apurv brilliantly explained in terms of the examples. Now we know how many Indians are listening to heartbreak songs. Can we safely say to some, just to add on the segments where it won't work, like, a healthcare sort of a sector will not have a hyper-personalization applicable in the way, like Vanda, like both of you, Vanda and Ankit, mentioned that, the way you would want to communicate, like me as a consumer, how much of that information I'm ready to take it on my face in terms of an advertising is what becomes important, right? So we can safely say in terms of a healthcare or a finance for that matter, like Vanda, you were saying that I've opted for a home loan, they keep on, and Ankit, that ties to the point where you said hyper-personalization is not just digital. If a bank knows I've taken a home loan, they'll keep on calling me, they'll keep on sending me emails, SMSs, etc., that you have opted for a home loan and you can now opt for a personal loan or a car loan or an education loan for your kid, etc. So that's how they're using this data, to go back in an offline mode and trying to reach out to us, while they want that hyper-personalization angle to come in. But me as a consumer may not be comfortable with it. So we can safely say in certain segments like personal healthcare or healthcare in terms of the whole well-being and wellness and nutrition can still be considered, but wellness and your finances, hyper-personalization may not work, or if it may work, it has to be done with the right metric, with the right caution. And in terms of pitfalls, like if you were to summarize, Ankit, like you rightly said, like, the data that we collect, how best we have to use it, how we have to present it will be very important. So this is one pitfall where me as a consumer, if the brand keeps on, if an advertiser keeps on sending ads to us, and we know for a fact that we don't want that information that we know to be seen, I might just become averse to the brand, right? I must just say that Gaana keeps on showing me that playlist that my heart is broken, and for the next 3 months, my heart is going to remain broken. Even if I found a partner, I will be like, I need to switch from Gaana to some other partner. And that's possible, right? That's one pitfall that we can say. So yeah, I guess this actually brings out the points where we have the benefits, there are also disadvantages as well to the same thing. So anything anyone would
Suchi,
like to
that
add
actually,
on? Yeah.
Yeah, that actually backfires the other way around. Someone is in a relationship, is listening to happy romantic songs, so breakup ke baad hum bole ye lo, and that creates a flood of memories. Then the first thing that user is going to do is to uninstall my app. So yeah.
Right. So yeah, if there are any other pointers, any other views that you want to express, around the points that we discussed in terms of hyper-personalization, before you want to summarize how best it can be done, any case studies that you can think of, any tips that you want to give advertisers apart from whatever we discussed, the floor is open.
I think, Suchi, I would just like to add one thing.
Yes, Amit.
See, there is always a good part and a bad part about each and everything. But I think if you talk about the overall brands and industry, we are just scratching the surface when it
Right.
comes to hyper-personalization, right? We are
Right.
still just trying to figure out what need to be done, how things need to be done. And as you rightly said, health tech or healthcare as a sector, they have not started doing personalization, because still they are into a very initial segment of selling things without knowing, without like a telling without checking whether which kind of a medicine, which kind of a test is required by which kind of a user. You will always get a message, get a full body checkup, get a full body
Right.
checkup at
Right.
200 rupees, 500 rupees, right? Because actually no one is getting into data. No one is, because right now, if you talk about India as a startup ecosystem, we are still scratching surface. If you talk to maybe some US companies, innovation and health tech, right? They're actually getting into the health records, EMR, and then they are saying, okay, what happened with a user maybe a year back, and which kind of possibilities which might occur maybe in next 6 months or 1 year, right? I think there is a pros, there is a con, right? But I think all of us as a marketer, and we understand one thing, beyond a limit or beyond a certain threshold, if we overdo anything, whether it's a personalization, whether it's a recommendation, it will certainly going to push a user towards uninstalling an app, right? So we always be really mindful of that, till what limit or till what extent we can push a user, right? Because if you get maybe 10 notifications from one brand in a single day, whatever is relevant or irrelevant, you will get irritated and you will uninstall the app, right? So I think we should certainly define the limits, that till what level we can go, and accordingly we can take a call. Certainly it's a good thing, because you're talking about a data, you are taking a decision based upon a data. So whatever ROI, whatever engagement you're getting from a user on a normal basis, you are certainly going to get a better ROI, better engagement, better retention from a user through personalization, and if you optimize a personalization in a certain way.
Absolutely. I think, Amit, that was bang on in terms of, how that whole hyper-personalization should be used with caution. What should be considered, because we as a country are still getting into it, like we've been discussing, and then everyone has been saying that we're just getting in there as compared to the much more advanced markets when it comes to all of this getting implemented. So yeah, any other point, any other views anyone would like to express?
One thing, Shuchi, I wanted to say, add
Yeah,
to
Priya.
what Amit said, was essentially what you call as KYC. You just need to know your customer. It's quite simple, really. Even if you're micro-targeting, you do it with permission. You
Right.
make sure there's a rigorous validation process, and there is some relevance when you're personalizing. And you need to have a constant feedback loop. I think that's one thing we tend to forget as marketers. Ask your users to signal their interest and intent by some means. You can have quizzes, you can ask them whether they like this message, does it make sense for them. You can ask them to indicate preferences on the kind of content they like to receive. It can't be a one-way traffic, essentially. So that's one thing we need to be very cognizant of, I think. And one interesting data point which I read, which I'd like to share, is apparently the attention span has now reduced from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. So we literally have a stop clock after we send a communication as marketers. That's how small the attention span is.
Sure. So I guess we've it up in the last whatever we've discussed, that data is essential. Using data from all angles with artificial intelligence and machine learning becomes the crux when you have to have hyper personalization getting implemented. That will lead to hyper personalization, will definitely help, and the success to define a hyper personalized campaign will come from engagement, relevance, and trust. Engagement in terms of how you're using that data to engage with those audiences. Relevance is when you use that data to serve the relevant content, and obviously build trust eventually, because like Amit also mentioned, that if I get 10 notifications, my trust is I'll be like, I don't want to use this app anymore because I'm done getting the notifications. So those three pillars is what we can say. Like there are pitfalls which Ankit, Apurv very nicely elaborated in terms of where it will work, where it will not work. So we have to keep that in mind when it comes to hyper personalization. And yeah, if we were to sum it up, this is how it looks like in just those 5 pointers. So yeah, it was great. Any thoughts, any viewpoints before we close the session from all of you all?
I think I'll just add on that, right? So I know the shift has already happened, right? From one to money to one to one, right? As that makes our job much more tougher, right? So we have to be really, really cautious of how do we use users' data for
Right.
their benefit, right? And just letting them know why we are doing that, right? So yeah, so that's the hyper personalization is already there. It's the future, right? And how do we make on most of it, right? So it's the most important thing.
Yeah, and also not forgetting that privacy concerns are coming up. GDPR is there somewhere. We are also getting into that position. So along with that, when we say data, like Ankit, you mentioned first party, second party, third party, we need to make sure we're building on those data points to get into this way of hyper personalization to become a success for us.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the wonderful discussion and this session. Now, I would like to invite the CEO and founder of AdGully, once again, Ms. Vijaya Ghosh, ma'am, to please come and share her insightful vision and thoughts on the proceedings of DIGIXX 2022 Summit and Awards.